we go. So let's do the slides. Fairly short. Nothing really different there. There's a triple whammy set of deadlines on Thursday at 11. Unfortunately, I tried to scatter things, but biweekly check-in shouldn't take too long. The capstone group formation isn't actually a big deliverable. Once I have the groups, then I will form them, and the project or the capstone project deliverables I'll unlock. Nothing should come as a surprise. The model is basically the same kind of evaluation model that I've been using for the projects 1 through 3. So if it comes as a big surprise, let me know right away, because then I'll try to figure out why it came as a big surprise and adjust. So, when I first started this class, I specifically didn't want to spend my time talking about particular tools, but at some point, I do need to at least provide you with some basic information about what it is that cloud computing infrastructure itself looks like. Now, ultimately, I still think the most powerful thing to do here is to make sure you know how to find about information on specific tools that you need to solve the particular job. But I can certainly touch a little bit on what those basic concepts are. And so the goal in this first foundation was to talk about things like virtual machines. Presumably everyone has been exposed to virtual machines before. This doesn't come as a huge shocker, a huge surprise. We have containers. Containers, virtual machines, and serverless are all interrelated because they're all solving the same basic problem, which is a very old problem. It's older than I am, and that's saying something. A very old problem in computer science, which is how do we share resources between different people in a way that ensures safety and scalability and economic feasibility. The reality is, sitting in front of about 85% of you is a device that has more computational power than you could get out of anything you could buy 20 years ago. So in the course of your lifetime, you've gone from not being able to afford your own data center to having one that you carry around with you. And yet, we continue to build data centers. We continue to constantly try to balance between what we do at endpoints and what we do in a central location. Why is that an issue? We have a lot of compute available at endpoints now. Maybe you've heard of edge computing. Edge computing is what do we do that is close to or on the device itself, versus data center computing, which is what we do in a big, large, very environmentally unfriendly, air-conditioned building, usually in some place with cheap real estate and lots of water. We fill it with computers. I mean, it used to be that you would build you put the computers in individually. These days, and for probably the last 20 years or so, that's not the way that data centers are built. You may not actually know it, but data centers are constructed in racks. An entire rack, which includes storage, compute, power, networking, they are pre-constructed, pre-built, wired up, tested, and dropped into place in a data center. When a computer in a data center fails, they just turn it off. They don't fix it anymore. An ancient company called Unisys, which is Burroughs and Sperry merged like 30 years ago. Unisys's primary business these days is in fact maintaining racks in data centers. They come in with forklifts. They take those, when they finally enough stuff has failed, they come in, they take the entire rack out, and they take it away, then they'll actually repair it, but they don't repair it in place. Nobody plugs cables in place in a data center anymore. A lot of times they don't even have lights. Lights create heat. Heat costs money because you have to remove the heat from the building. And now we're in the world of extreme data centers, of these data centers where we are stuffing as many GPUs as we can possibly get into them. Data centers that consume more power than a small city. And they're all over the place. The concerns in a data center are very different than they are the concerns we have in this class about cloud computing. We are trying to build things that use the cloud. When they actually maintain the cloud, their focus is on scale, simplicity, not simplicity of the data center itself, but simplicity of the way that you use the data center. You decide you're going to use a database. What you choose in picking a database relates to the services that the database guarantees to you. In exchange, the amount they charge you will depend upon the level of service that you're asking for. So you start off with using MySQL because it's cheap, it's plentiful. You can even run it on your own device. It's understandable. MySQL does in fact have some scalability options. You can do data replication with it. I don't think it does write-write replication. Write-write replication is really hard to get correct. Really, really hard. You can do it. It's possible, but it's not easily done. If any of you take 416, which I'll be teaching next term, is entirely focused on how do we get a bunch of different computers to agree on anything? Because we want a bunch of different computers to look like they're one computer. So even if something goes wrong, distributed systems is all about failure. By dealing with most classes of failure, you building a cloud-based app don't have to deal with it until, I don't know, you're using Cloudflare and it goes down. Think I'm making that one up? No, sorry, it happened yesterday, today. I think it's over now, I know that. And I'm literally getting advertisements from people giving 10% off because of the service outage from Cloudflare, and I'm laughing going, so all they're doing is just viewing this as one more opportunity to market their products and services. So I've talked a lot about the extractive nature of the business. One of the things that I haven't talked as much about is what are your alternatives? So I'm going to work through and talk about different people whose work has been used to build cloud computing services and the things, or tech people in general, and the things that they've done different. So I don't want you to feel like you're trapped in this, because you're not trapped. You do have an option. You actually have more control than you realize. Does anybody have any questions about the video material you didn't watch? Because the last thing in the world you need to do is watch more videos when you could spend an hour on TikTok, which is way more entertaining than anything I could have actually pointed to. Maybe if I'd put a list of curated TikTok videos, people would have watched them. Nah. Because then they'd be in your feed. And you'd be watching those kinds of videos all the time, and you'd be like, oh, this is disgusting, it's sick. Even watching these things on YouTube, like 85 or 90% of them are on YouTube, and then some are on Amazon's website. Even watching those videos means that once you've watched a couple of those videos, you'll be getting them in your feed continuously from now until eternity. Great. So you should find that there is now a module for the in-class materials for this session that's unlocked, and it includes the what we're going to talk about, which is the biography cards. And let me see. So I actually wrote notes for myself because I'm like, I need to make sure I've got this right. So let's start by, where are they? That's in, where's the other one? Ah, right. Let's start by talking about Ken Jacobus. So what we're going to do is I want you guys to take like 5 minutes and go find out a little bit about this person. There's stuff in the bio card. You can look it up. You can just take his name and see what you can actually find out. You can ask your LLM. You can use Perplexity. I don't actually care. Or you can sit there and watch TikTok videos. It's up to you. But the goal here is to point out a couple of things. One, these are people who are actually successful in tech and then made a decision to not become part of the exploitative system that it's become. Another commonality is in many cases, these people built technologies, gave them away, were still successful, and the technologies they gave away are now being monetized by Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, IBM, so on and so forth. I'm not going to do a list of 4 people every time. I'm just going to do that this time. Another one that I actually floated by while I was looking and brainstorming this was David Sheraton, who was an undergraduate here, who graduated. And one of his concerns, so he's quirky. I mean, when I first met him, literally I started working for him a month after he got tenure at Stanford. So this is a long time ago. And he bought a brand new bicycle, and the first thing he did was spray paint it. So it looked like an old trash bicycle. Why? Exactly. It doesn't work in Vancouver. They steal it anyway. But, bicycle theft on the Stanford campus was very high. I'm sure it's not high here at the UBC campus. I'm sure that you could leave a bicycle sitting by the side of an office here and come back 5 minutes later and it would be gone. There's actually a video, I don't remember if it's YouTube or TikTok, there's actually a video of a guy who left a laptop in various places to see how long it took before it disappeared. And then he did it in China, and he came back an hour later and it was still there. And then he came back like a half day later and it was still there. No one took it. So it's a very interesting social commentary. In Italy, I think it took under 2 minutes for it to disappear. So the first guy is Ken Jacobus. Go ahead, take a little bit of time. I think this is kind of interesting because I'd never heard of this guy. Actually, I'd never heard of any of these people, which is why I thought it was interesting. So there's lots and lots of people we've never heard of who have actually done interesting work and then decided to try and make the world a better place. How's that? And let me see, I have a phone somewhere. I'll set a 5-minute timer. I've already talked for a minute, so. Yeah. Sorry? It is in the materials in the Lecture 19 module, but his name is Jacobus, Jacobus, Ken Jacobus. Hey, no worries. And this is actually the sheet that's in the module, so it includes at least the title of the article it came from. I thought they were all links, but when you print things, links go away. And as I learned this morning, when you use PowerPoint, it strips links out to keep people safe, which kind of defeats the purpose of putting links in the slides. Where should we put it over there? All right. So one of the reasons I thought this guy was actually pretty interesting is that he's not a big name. He's the name of someone who worked at startups, made decent money, and decided that he didn't want to stay in that world. So he took that as a means of going and doing something different. Is there anybody in here who thinks that building compostable takeout containers to independent restaurants is useful? One person. The rest of you are like, fuck the environment, I don't really care. I'll just stay indoors with air conditioning. How hard could it possibly be? Right. I thought it was pretty cool. I've never heard of the guy. I used to live in New Hampshire for 14 years, and before I came to Vancouver, actually. 17 years ago. So that was pretty cool. So you do have alternatives. I mean, have any of you ever heard of the Free Software Foundation? Maybe you've heard of it through the GNU Public License. Anybody ever heard of the GNU Public License? So I met Richard Stallman. I didn't know who the hell he was. I met Richard Stallman at a dinner group meeting in Berkeley many years ago when I was working at Stanford. And I ended up having a conversation, because of course it's Richard Stallman, I ended up having a conversation with him about intellectual property rights. Now, having a conversation about intellectual property rights with Richard Stallman, especially when you don't know him, is imagine you bumped into the Pope accidentally, you didn't know it was the Pope, and you ended up having a conversation about religion. Very similar. Okay, very interesting. Stallman couch surfed his entire career. He's still couch surfing. I don't think he's dead. He was a very interesting person. He truly believed that software should be shared. And he was very, I think in many ways, very wise to do it. He was very careful to craft this license that said, if I share my free software with you, you have to share it with other people as well. Compare that to the MIT license, where the MIT license says, I share this with you and you can do whatever the fuck you please with it. If you want to turn this into a commodity product and make money from it, go for it. Now, even today, the use of GNU licensed software is much more limited than the use of MIT or Apache licensed software, because MIT and Apache allowed people to monetize. Have you ever heard of a company called Databricks? How many of you would take a job at Databricks if offered one? Why? Why would you take a job there? Come on, it's okay. You can say the reason. I mean, nobody's going to be surprised when you say because it pays well. That's a perfectly legitimate reason to do that. Databricks was a company that took Apache Spark and productized it. They took something that a whole community of people built, and then they turned it into a commercial product offering. Right or wrong, I'm not saying. That's up for you to decide. But the point is, this is a recurring theme. What we have is tech people largely like to solve problems. We like to take something hard, break it down, make it work, and then share it with the rest of the world. Most people don't start out saying, I want to build Microsoft, I want to build Google, I want to build Amazon. Some people do. I mean, Jeff Bezos didn't set out to build Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services actually emerged from his vision of being able to sell books to anybody, anywhere. Because then they found out they needed IT infrastructure, and they built that. But much of the IT infrastructure that Amazon is based upon is in turn software that other people built, and then they've commoditized, and they've commercialized it. So the second name, and now that's me talking, I really should be listening. So what did you think about this? I mean, is this guy just crazy? This is certainly one trajectory. You go, you make enough money, and then you go do something that brings social good, environmental good. But of course, maybe you're one of those people who thinks that the environment is stupid and we should just simply get rid of it.
Seems the fact that a lot of these people have made money is a common thread. Like it's fine to say like they have.
That's why I that's why I pointed at Stallman. Stallman hasn't made money off of this. Stallman still lives a much less lavish lifestyle than you might think. Some people, the money definitely is a huge motivating factor, but it's kind of odd because the billionaires aren't motivated by money anymore. I don't know what exactly it is that motivates them. There is still a certain aspect of that. I need to prove that I can do something that's better than other people. So there's that competition angle or aspect of it. I mean, Chariton is, what, $8 or $9 billion, but he still lives in the same house he lived when I was working for him. He still cuts his own hair. He probably still spray paints his new bicycle to make sure that they don't steal it. So it's not money that becomes a motivation at some level. And so maybe that's one of the escape hatches, is you make enough money that you realize that you don't have to keep doing something that becomes soul-sucking forever. You do a startup company. I mean, these people are not like wild successes. They're not multi-billionaires. This is a guy who sold his company for $17.3 million. I have a friend who sold his company for $12 million and then ended up buying Brondo. He decided to make beverages. Have you ever heard of Brondo? So there is a movie called Idiocracy. And in the movie Idiocracy, they use Brondo to water the plants because it has electrolytes, and that's what plants crave. So it's all about advertising. This is also a movie where Carl's Jr. is the controlling corporation of the world. But its premise is that humans are breeding themselves for stupidity. And so he was crazy. He actually licensed the right to make this product. And then he ended up selling it to somebody else, and made a high caffeine beverage called cocaine. Yep, had fun doing it. Enjoyed living life. So Bumbernick is an interesting example, right? So he sold his company for $17 million. So that means he didn't get $17 million. He got some piece of $17 million. Maybe he got $5 million. But in 2011, and even to some extent today, if somebody handed you $5 million US, you'd never have to work again. I mean, would you be like buying jets? No. So go ahead, spend 5 minutes looking at Bill and see what you can find out about him. Now, this time, I'm going to ask you guys to come up with something you found about him that's interesting. So you don't have to keep listening to me yammer on. I need to have some bad music to play in the background. Something AI generated, so therefore I can't be, they won't take my video down on YouTube because I'm using copyrighted music. Sorry?
Disney music.
Disney music, yeah. From Steamboat Willie. Even now, you can't actually get LLMs to do Steamboat Willie impressions, despite the fact that it's out of copyright. All right. So this time we've got Bill Bumbernick. Now, one of the things that I was kind of discouraged by when I saw these examples is that they're all men. So I have a challenge between now and the end of this class to find at least one woman example. Have any of you heard of Arista Networks? Arista Networks was co-founded by David Sheraton, although he ultimately cashed out and moved on because he didn't agree with the way the company was being run. So there you go, tie into UBC directly, not just because it's here in Burnaby, which is close to Vancouver, but not quite. So, did anybody find anything interesting out about Bill Bumbernick? What?
They have like a dive bar in a restaurant.
A what bar?
A dive bar.
A dive bar in a restaurant.
Yeah. Allegedly.
Oh, is there something wrong with that?
No. I just find it's like a good career transformation.
Dive bar in a restaurant. Well, fair enough. So, he's an engineer, had a modestly successful company, sold it, used the money, moved on, and looked to ways of helping other people, food justice, family-centered work. And apparently he had a dive bar in a restaurant. Pretty cool. Anybody else find anything interesting?
I found it interesting that like he sold this company and then he went on like a state tour of the US, which he could do because he had all this money, where he got this idea for this company. And like same sort of thing with like the first example, like they had to play the game to get the capital to take this risk that we're now like looking at as like a success story. But I think there's a bit of like survivorship bias there.
Definitely. I think it's actually a really good observation. That's why I think that the last example we'll use today is an interesting counterpoint. And one of the reasons I brought Stallman up as well. People who know much about the field know who Richard Stallman is, but people have heard of GNU, so they know what GNU stands for, at least superficially. And he never made a big success in tech. Anybody else? And that's a really good observation. So there's a certain amount of survivorship bias going on here, and that's always a problem with any of these sorts of analyses, is you only see success stories, you don't see failure stories. But then we'd also have to ask ourselves, what is a failure story? Is the success there that these people went on to create new businesses that made money as well, or is the success that they escaped from tech, or is the success something else? And the key here, I think, is you have to define what success is for you. Somebody on Discord was commenting about how what they really were saying, and I don't think they quite said it, was, well, I don't know exactly what the grading criteria are for the capstone project. And of course, being hyper-focused on min-maxing out the grade, that's really what they wanted access to. And it made me think that, in fact, what I might do next time, you're safe on this one, is have you define what your success is. In other words, you contract with me and say, if I do this, this is the grade that I want to get. Because in the real world, that's often what's going to happen. You're going to end up trying to define for you what success is. You'll have to negotiate it with someone else sometimes because they're giving you something in exchange. But it's a negotiation. It's not a one-way street. So here we go. Somebody completely different. This one is Satyajit Hange from Pune, India, was a marketing guy. We'll do the 5 more minutes. So here we go. I've managed to find somebody who's at least not from Western tech. Not that Pune isn't exactly just an extension of Silicon Valley into India. All right. So anybody find anything they found interesting about Satyajit? Nope. Okay, so 25,000 rupees is how much in Canadian currency?
No idea.
That's why I'm asking you.
$400.
Okay, so you spent $400 to prove that his tomato ketchup was real ketchup. Okay. Interesting. Why did you find that interesting?
You receive like a complaint from a customer and they're trying to take it seriously and try to that's good.
So that's actually an interesting counterpoint. So what he did was he actually received a complaint from a customer who challenged him, and he took it seriously. And I would compare that to an example that I use. So I play World of Warcraft, and someone decided to actually test Blizzard to see how good their customer support was, and he challenged the banning of his account. Now here's the context. His account wasn't banned. You know what he got back as a response? They upheld the ban on his account. What does that tell you? The customers don't matter. So another thing to take away from that has nothing to do with success or failure. It has to do with the fact that as companies become large and primarily focused on profit, they mostly view customers as being an inconvenience. You are a source of revenue. You are not someone who is engaging in a reciprocal arrangement where they give you something of value and you give them something of value in return. Mostly what they want to do is they want to take the money out of your pocket and keep it. How many of you have heard of Adobe? Adobe has a license-based scheme for Adobe software, which says it's X number of dollars per month. A lot of people don't realize that the X number of dollars per month is on a per annum basis. So if you decide 6 months into your contract that you don't want Adobe anymore, and you cancel it, they say, that's fine, you owe us for the rest of the year. Now they combine that with the fact that they automatically will recharge you. I don't know if you've ever had that happen where you get a recurring charge of something you're not using anymore. And it's not like they'll go and take it off for the current year. Okay, so they didn't give you anything of value, and in exchange, you gave them money. Anybody ever heard of gym memberships? This is not new, it's been around for a long time. You join a gym. The gym charges you every month. Many of the gyms are actually based upon a model that you won't actually go. So they'll just keep charging your credit card every month, month after month. So that's an interesting distinction that has nothing to do with success or failure. It has to do with the fact that he genuinely engaged with customers as if they actually had some sort of value beyond their monetary exploitation perspective. Anybody find any other interesting finds out of this? Okay. I'm going to actually skip the fourth one because I look at it and I'm like, you know, it's fine. It's interesting. Some dude made money selling luxury goods and decided to go to Australia. It's not really tech. It's just somebody who decided to go a different path. That's fine. Of course, the title of the page was The Winners Who Walked Away. So the survivalship bias is actually, while not clearly called out, is at least very obvious from the title of the page. What about the people who didn't walk away? Before we talk about that, I have put together this Google form, which you should be able to access. There's supposed to be a link to it in the Lecture 19 module. And so the idea is to give you an opportunity to look for these kinds of patterns, like in the conversation we've had today, where what did you observe? Who owns the maintenance debt? Who has to pay for this? So these are extraction refusal ledgers. So somebody extracts something from someone else, who's paying the debt? Who's responsible for that? And why would they refuse? So I just gave you a kind of an example of that, in fact, which was we have Adobe, who carefully disguises the fact that you've given them a license. This is another interesting thing about Adobe. You've given them a license to use anything you do in interacting with their product to improve their own services and products. Now, they have publicly stated that doesn't mean they're going to use your data for training in AI. But this is one of those harsh realities. Who now becomes responsible for enforcing that? How many of you have ever used any Adobe products? What do you use?
I used to use
Premiere Pro, so you make videos. So if you found out that they were actually taking your videos and using them to train AI models to build videos, how would that make you feel? Your videos aren't very good, so it probably is fine, but and I have no idea about his videos. The line was there for the joke, and yeah, I mean, if I use Premiere Pro, and I have used it before, but not very much, my videos wouldn't be worth the use in training. How many of you use ChatGPT? How many of you have opted out of letting them use your data? You can't do that with a free account. You can only do that with a paid account. ChatGPT will actually, OpenAI will actually allow you to use 1 million tokens on their API for free as long as they can use the data that they extract from that in training. So that's fine, but it means anything you share becomes training fodder for their LLMs. If it's a trade secret, you don't own the trade secret anymore. It's not a secret anymore. You've shared it with a third party. That might be something that is beyond your understanding or experience. So in that particular case, I would say that it's a lack of refusing that becomes the problem. You didn't refuse to use the service, and you are the one who owns the maintenance debt. So this is just a different framing, a different way of thinking about who's paying for these things. This actually feeds into a whole shared anonymous Google Docs or Google Sheets document. So if you put something in here, and feel free to use it after the class as well, you put something in here, it will actually show up and other people will be able to see it. And so the idea, or the hope is, over time, what we'll actually see is a series of these things. Things that you notice day to day, things that you notice while you're working on your projects or working on other classes or dealing with annoying companies or so on and so forth. So it's just a mechanism for considering that. All right, I'm going to skip Richard Christensen because I don't really care about Hermes. I mentioned that. Those were the Birkin handbags. Then there was a guy whose last name was Rothschild. Imagine that. Who built NFTs of pictures of Birkin handbags with various skins on them, textures on them. Does anybody know what an NFT is? Non-fungible token? No one's heard of an NFT before. All right, if you know anything about an NFT, what cryptocurrency is usually used for trading them? Do you know? See, NFTs are in fact tokens of ownership. Think of it as a form of title. So if you think of real estate titles here in the province are managed by a central registry, unless they're Aboriginal titles, in which case we don't have a system for that yet. And what that means is there's a definitive source of truth for who actually owns a piece of property. And the ownership records are public, not necessarily easily accessible, but they are public. One of the projects that used blockchain was in fact a land title registry. One of the interesting challenges that often arises when there are regime changes, so the government, the political controls of a country change hands, they can change the records. The records get destroyed, they get lost. Property that was originally belonging to someone is transferred and now belongs to someone else. So the idea in using a blockchain, a distributed ledger for property ownership, was the idea that now we actually have a way of preventing those kinds of events from happening. Because even if the blockchain gets shut down, there will be independent records of the transactions that were on that blockchain. And they're not impossible, but it's extremely difficult to forge them. So think of NFTs as being not necessarily land records, although it can be used for that, but in fact just ownership records of something. In this particular case, the something you own is the rights to an image, one of these Meta Birkin handbags, images, not actual handbags. And of course, Hermes sued Rothschild for it. Those are typically done on the Ethereum blockchain, and the reason that they use the Ethereum blockchain is because Ethereum itself actually has a mechanism for encoding contracts. It has a Turing-complete contractual language. So you can build binding contracts, including ownership contracts. During the pandemic, there was a company here in Vancouver that implemented an NFT form called a CryptoKitty. CryptoKitties were nothing more than ownership rights on a particular instance of this algorithm, which was basically generated a picture of a cat, a virtual cat, not a real cat. And you could actually breed the cats. So you could create new kitties. And they used a genetic algorithm, legit, to create new kitties. And then you could sell them. And it became a craze for a while, and they made some money on it and whatnot. But that's what an NFT is. So that was a long digression. So that finishes that, which is great. I can then move on. And then I'm going to talk about the last person here, and that's Ian Murdoch. Have any of you ever heard of Debian Unix or Linux? You probably have actually used a derivative or a member of the Debian family. Have any of you ever used Ubuntu? Ubuntu Linux is in fact a Debian-derived Linux version. And there's a data sheet about Ian Murdoch. He actually didn't cash in. He explicitly made a different decision, and that decision was that he wanted to guarantee that the Debian distribution of Linux was always free. He didn't try to monetize it. He didn't try to productize it. And he was somewhat successful in doing that. I say somewhat because other people have monetized Debian Linux. I would say that Ubuntu is one of the most frequently used versions of Linux. If you're finishing your degree here and you start looking at jobs, one of the companies you might choose to work for is Canonical. And Canonical actually commercially supports Ubuntu Linux. Now, they walk an interesting path there because they do make money from Ubuntu Linux, but it is still under a license that doesn't allow them to close source it. So it has to remain open source. I would point out that if you go to use AWS and you say, I want a virtual machine, odds are it will end up being an Ubuntu virtual machine. So Amazon gets income from using the output of these communities, but doesn't, I can't say they don't share anything with that community, but Amazon is particularly well known for not sharing very much at all in terms of financial support for the open source community. And so the reason that I think Ian Murdoch is an interesting example is it's a different path, and he was successful at some level, even though he committed suicide in 2015. And I mean, if you want to explore, you should look into the complex circumstances around his death, because his suicide was after a violent altercation with the San Francisco police. So he was living right there in the peak of Silicon Valley. How many of you have ever been to San Francisco? Nobody. Interesting. I mean, you could easily get a job and end up working in San Francisco and earning $250,000 a year US and finding out that you can still only afford a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate. It's kind of like Vancouver, so it's not really that different, is it? This is a common pattern, especially in open source, that what we see is the commercial vendors actually rely upon the open source community to build good ideas. Why pay to do your own research when you can let the OSS community filter through things and give you things like Apache Lucene, which is the basis of Amazon's Elasticsearch. And a lot of people use Elasticsearch, but it's based on Apache Lucene. Databricks is based upon Apache Spark, and Spark is a data set model that was built from academic sources. Most of the databases that they're using are in fact based on open source. Redis is a really good example of this, where Redis is actually, so it started out as an open source project, and then they decided to try and make it closed source a couple of years ago. And now they've moved to a slightly different model of that, and they're struggling around that because, but that is one of the common patterns we also see is people start with an open source product and then they turn it into a closed source or semi-closed source product. And they monetize it because it's what you have to do in order to pay the bills. And it's just the reality we've built. Ian Murdoch is an interesting counterexample because he didn't monetize Debian. He explicitly refused to do that. These are examples. I think I've talked about the NTP example. There's a really cool XKCD that shows this like big structure of all the different pieces of the modern internet, and on the bottom is this little block that's labeled as one guy who supports this piece, and it's like this one post that's holding up the whole structure above it. That actually was, I'm trying to remember if that was an NTP protocol or, I mean, there's a number of these protocols. OpenSSL is a really good example of one of these, where there was the Heartbleed attack, and everybody was all up in arms about this, but the people who are supporting this stuff are doing it as volunteer labor. And maybe, I think the guy who supports NTP, the network time protocol, the thing that keeps our clocks in sync across the internet, was making like $20,000 a year off of it. So not exactly living high on the hog, as it were. And the disturbing thing about this, and the thing to keep in mind, is that when you're building services and systems on top of cloud providers who in turn are building on top of these sorts of components, the whole thing doesn't feel very stable, does it? That's why when Cloudflare goes down, a whole bunch of shit breaks. That's why when Amazon Web Services gets a misconfigured DNS server, things go wrong. There were a number of pundits, I don't know if it's true or not, but there were a number of pundits who suggested that maybe that had to do with their layoffs. That one of the things that these companies do is they take people with lots of institutional knowledge and they get rid of them. And so that's another reason to make sure that you always have an escape plan. What am I going to do instead? You can't, well, I mean, I suppose you could always get a job as a barista at Starbucks, but given the way that the environment is going, the availability of coffee is becoming increasingly limited. People know that, right? I mean, we can actually see that there will be a point where coffee becomes prohibitively expensive because the environmental change will restrict the growing. The true tragedy is that the same thing is happening with chocolate. Chocolate is becoming increasingly expensive. Does anyone know what chocolate is, what you grow to create chocolate? Sorry?
Cacao beans.
But what are they? What kind of plant is it? Do you know? It's an orchid. There's a couple of sources of chocolate, but they are basically flowering plants. And they grow in very restricted equatorial zones, and their climate is affected. Silkworms are similarly challenged, so the availability of silk becomes increasingly complicated. It used to be coral reefs were very common, now they're becoming very rare because they're dying out. So there are lots of these kinds of patterns. I just want you to be aware of what the challenges are that face you. I think, even though Ian Murdoch's life ended violently, I think that there's something to be said for doing what you believe in, not just living for money. But that's your choice to make, it's not mine. So here's an interesting question for you to consider. You're going to get a job, you're going to start working in that job. At what point will the company do something that makes you say, I would rather quit, I would rather leave? Is it because they support, I'll use some terms that are deliberately loaded, Palestinian genocide. Whether you believe that that exists or not, it doesn't matter. Those are loaded terms. Would that be something that triggered you to walk away? If it wouldn't, what would? Do you have any limits at all? And I guarantee you your limits will change as you get older. When you are younger and you are single and you have options, you will view things differently than when you are older and you have a family and you have obligations. And that's okay, it's kind of the nature of life. Is there anything that you wouldn't do for money right now? You're all perfectly willing to be contract killers. Okay, good to know. Thank you. I'm going to make sure I wear a bulletproof vest next time. You're going to let me get away with that. You're all going to sit there and basically say, yeah, I have no limits, really? Is there anything at all that you view as a red line, a line you won't cross? Name it. Just what? What wouldn't you do? I mean, wash your socks or something? Yeah, right. You're sitting there all by yourself. I'm like, I'll just spit on her.
I guess.
Oh, there he's going to indulge you. You guess what?
Probably. I mean, in general, I think it would be when it's obvious that direct harm is happening, and for most people, that would be an obvious one. But then, I guess the question is just in the in-between of like, well, maybe people are being hurt, and
So maybe the secret is to not look for harm. And then it's not a direct harm that you observe, it's an indirect harm that you didn't know about. Well, I've kind of stripped that one away from you, haven't I? that defense isn't going to work as well, because you're always going to be sitting there now thinking about who's being affected by this that's not here. If so, then I've achieved my goal. If you decide that you want to make a decision like that, to do something that you would have thought now is unethical, and you decide later, I have to do this anyway, I want you to do it knowingly, not unknowingly. There's too many people in tech who don't think about the impact of what they're doing and how it affects other people. I mean, I think that's a great observation, by the way. I applaud you for basically putting that out there, because at least you have some guts, whereas the rest of the class is sitting there going, oh, there's lots of things I wouldn't do, but I'm not going to say them here because that would be embarrassing. Wow, I can challenge you and you still keep your mouth shut. Okay, fine. All right, you're the only non-contract killer in the room, and the rest of them, watch out. I wouldn't turn my back to them anymore. I keep turning my back to you guys. That's probably a bad idea. Except I'm not important enough to actually have a contract out of my life. So, all right. That's it. The next lecture is going to be a different discussion format, because I'm not going to keep bringing up people, but it will be the same thing. You've got some videos. I tried to keep the videos under 15 minutes. And since I figured that way, since you're going to watch them at 2x speed anyway, or you're going to give it to your AI and say, please summarize this video for me, you've got maybe 15 or 20 minutes worth of total prep time. The other reason I gave those videos is because they were reasonable introductions to the topic, and at some point you might say, oh crap, I need to know about, and you're going to have this list of things that you know are already. I mean, I did spend a lot of time watching through them. I didn't feed them through LLMs to do that. So they'll at least give you a basic intro, and once you've hit that basic intro, Google will do the rest of the work for you, because it will then proceed to give you all sorts of other videos about the same topic in your feed. It's like using the system to give you what you need. Isn't that kind of like cool? And that's the other skill that I hope that you walk away from this class with, which is the ability to fuck with the algorithms. Claude keeps asking me, how do you feel about this conversation? I keep saying, go away. Go get your data from somebody in the Philippines for $2 an hour.
Like it asks you to, oh.
Yeah, in Claude Code, it does. Don't you get that, rate this, how happy are you with Claude's thing? I always say dismiss. I always say 0, which doesn't give them any data. And that's just me being obstructionist.